The room was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters shuffled in their seats, and the low hum of murmurs filled the air. The anticipation was almost palpable. Everyone knew today's press conference was going to be different. At the center of it all, Barron Trump stood at the podium. He was taller than most expected, his posture poised, his expression unreadable. It was his first major press event, and despite the weight of expectations, he looked unfazed. The media had been waiting for this moment for years. What would he say? How would he handle the pressure? Would he crumble under the scrutiny, or would he rise to the occasion? Behind him, the backdrop bore the Trump family's emblem. But today wasn't about his father. It was about him. The reporters were itching to get started. Some were here for genuine questions, but others? They were here to tear him apart. As soon as the press secretary gave the nod, the questions began. A woman from a respected news outlet spoke first. "Mr. Trump, can you tell us about the purpose of today's announcement?" Barron leaned toward the microphone. His voice was deep, steady, commanding attention without demanding it. "Absolutely," he said. "Today is about moving forward. It's about looking at what we can achieve, not just what's been said in the past." His calm and controlled tone was unexpected. Some reporters exchanged quick glances. This wasn't the stumbling, unsure response they had been hoping for. More questions came. He answered each one efficiently, never hesitating, never flustered. But then, it happened. A reporter from a well-known controversial media outlet took the mic. His tone was different, not neutral, but sharp. The tension in the room shifted instantly. The man leaned forward, smirking slightly. "Mr. Trump, let's be honest here. You're only standing at this podium because of your last name. Do you actually have anything of value to say, or are we just witnessing another privileged kid playing politics?" A hush fell over the room. Some reporters looked away. Others held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. This was it. The trap. A carefully designed question meant not to seek information, but to embarrass him. Barron could have gotten angry. He could have stumbled or dodged the question. But instead, he smiled. A small, knowing smirk. Then, he leaned in just slightly and spoke. "That's an interesting question, but let me ask you something. Why do you feel the need to ask it?" The room froze. The reporter's smirk vanished, and in that moment, everyone knew. This was about to be something no one would forget. For a moment, the room was silent. The aggressive reporter who had just attempted to humiliate Barron was now caught off guard. He hadn't expected that response. The murmurs in the press room grew louder. Barron Trump had just turned the question around, calmly, confidently, without a hint of anger. The reporter blinked, as if trying to regain control. Well, it's a fair question, isn't it?" he said, his voice losing some of its edge. "You've lived a privileged life, and some would say you haven't had to work for what you have. Don't you think it's valid to ask if you're truly qualified to stand here?" The loaded question hung in the air. Barron didn't rush his answer. Instead, he took a brief pause, glanced around the room, and then spoke with a clarity that stunned everyone. "I think what's more important than where someone comes from is what they choose to do with the opportunities they have," he said, his voice even and composed. "Some people inherit wealth and waste it. Others start with nothing and change the world. What really matters is what you do with what you're given." The reporter shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't going as planned. He had expected Barron to stumble or lash out. Instead, he had turned the question into a lesson. Some of the other reporters nodded slightly. A few even scribbled notes, realizing they had just heard something that would make headlines. But the reporter wasn't done. He adjusted his microphone and pressed forward. "So, are you saying you deserve to be here? That you're different from other privileged kids?" Barron gave a small, knowing smile. "I'm saying that the real measure of a person isn't where they start, but how they use their position to create something meaningful," he replied. "And if you're asking if I think I belong here, yes, I do. Just like every person in this room who worked hard to be here." This time there was a ripple in the crowd. Some reporters exchanged glances. Others looked down at their notes, perhaps rethinking their own biases. The air had changed. The tone of the press conference wasn't what they had expected. Barron wasn't defensive, nor was he backing down. Instead, he was leading the conversation with intelligence and confidence, and that's when something truly unexpected happened. A different reporter, one from a competing network, cleared his throat. "I have to say," he began, shifting in his seat, "that's one of the most level-headed responses I've heard in this room in a while." Some of the journalists chuckled softly. Even those who had come expecting to tear him down were now reconsidering. Barron nodded politely. "I appreciate that. Now, are there any questions about the actual event we're here to discuss?" Laughter spread through the room. Tension broke. Even the aggressive reporter lowered his gaze, realizing he had lost control of the moment. What had started as an attempt to corner Barron Trump had now become a lesson in composure, leadership, and handling criticism with grace. And everyone in that room knew it. The press conference should have moved on. The energy had already shifted in Barron's favor. But the reporter wasn't ready to let go. His pride was on the line, and he wasn't about to let a composed, confident young man outmaneuver him on live television. Leaning forward into his microphone, he forced a smirk and fired back. "That's a clever response, Barron. But let's be real. If your last name wasn't Trump, you wouldn't be on this stage. What do you say to those who believe you're just another name riding on someone else's success?" The crowd stirred uneasily. Some reporters exchanged knowing glances. This was the real attack. It wasn't about Barron's accomplishments or what he had to say. It was about undermining his legitimacy. The cameras zoomed in on Barron, waiting for his reaction. A less prepared person might have hesitated, might have faltered, lost their cool, or responded with frustration. But Barron? He remained completely unfazed. He tilted his head slightly, considering his words. Then he leaned into the microphone, his voice even calmer than before. "That's a fair point. I can't control the name I was born with, but neither can anyone else in this room." The audience froze. Barron let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "The real question isn't about privilege, it's about what you do with it. Some people are born into money, some into hardship. But at the end of the day, success isn't about where you start. It's about the work you put in." The tone in the room shifted again. The reporter's smirk flickered. He had walked into this exchange expecting an easy takedown. Instead, he had been met with logic and composure. But Barron wasn't done. He adjusted his microphone and looked directly at the reporter. "Let me ask you this. How many reporters in this room have worked for years to be here? How many have worked late nights, sacrificed weekends, pushed themselves harder than they thought possible?" A few journalists nodded slightly, recognizing the truth in his words. Barron continued, his tone firm but respectful. "Now imagine if someone dismissed all of that and said, 'You're only sitting in that chair because of your network, your connections, or the people who vouched for you.' Would that be fair?" The room was completely silent now. The reporter opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing, because the truth was clear. No matter where you start, it's what you do that defines you. Barron leaned back, his point made, and for the first time that day, the reporter looked genuinely speechless. For a long moment, no one spoke. The aggressive reporter, who had walked into this press conference with the intention of embarrassing Barron, now sat there, completely silent. The entire room could feel the shift. Barron had just flipped the narrative. He didn't just defend himself. He made the reporter question his own approach. And yet Barron still wasn't done. He leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, with measured control, he said, "Let me make something clear. I respect the press. You have a job to do. You ask tough questions, you hold people accountable, and that's important. But there's a difference between asking a question and setting a trap." The tension in the room crackled. A few reporters subtly nodded. They understood exactly what he meant. The reporter's confidence had cracked, but he wasn't ready to back down yet. Clearing his throat, he attempted to regain control of the conversation. "All right, let's talk about your so-called work ethic. You say it's not about your last name, so tell us, what exactly have you done to earn the right to stand here today?" The words echoed in the room. Some reporters leaned in, expecting a defensive response. Instead, Barron smiled. Not a cocky smirk, not a forced grin, just a calm, knowing smile. And then he answered, his voice unwavering. "That's a great question." A flicker of surprise crossed the reporter's face. "I could list my experiences, my education, my efforts, and what I've built. But honestly, I don't expect anyone to believe words alone. That's not how credibility works. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. Credibility is earned, over time, through action, through results. And I fully intend to prove myself, not through interviews or press conferences, but through the work I do. The entire press room was dead silent. The words hit hard, because they were true. Barron wasn't playing their game. He wasn't justifying himself. He was stating a fact, one that no reporter could argue with. The once arrogant reporter shifted uncomfortably, clearly outmaneuvered. And then, in a move no one expected, a slow round of applause started in the back of the room. It wasn't staged. It wasn't forced. It was respect. And just like that, Barron Trump had done what no one expected. He had completely won the room over. The quiet applause grew louder. At first, it was just a few reporters in the back, but soon, others joined in. Not because they were told to, but because they had just witnessed something remarkable. Barron Trump had walked into this press conference underestimated. Many had expected him to stumble, to react emotionally, or to falter under pressure. But instead, he had turned the entire narrative around with poise, intelligence, and an unshakable sense of self. Even reporters who had come in with skepticism couldn't deny what they had just seen. The aggressive reporter, now visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat and leaned away from the microphone. He had nothing left to say. And Barron? He remained calm, composed, exactly as he had been from the start. A new reporter took the mic, this time from a network known for its neutrality. Barron, I have to say, your approach to handling criticism today has been impressive. But let me ask you, do you feel a certain pressure given your last name to constantly prove yourself? It was a genuine question. Not an attack. Not a trap. Barron gave a small nod, acknowledging the weight of the moment. Of course, he admitted. Having a name like mine comes with expectations. Some fair, some not. But that's life. Everyone faces challenges, just in different ways. The press listened intently. This wasn't just another political answer. This was honesty. The truth is, I don't want to be judged by my last name. I want to be judged by my character, my actions, and the way I treat people. That's how anyone should be measured. The room stayed silent for a beat, absorbing the depth of what he had just said. For the first time, this wasn't just about being a Trump. This was about a young man standing on his own, proving himself through words and actions rather than reputation. Even the most critical journalists in the room seemed to reevaluate their perception of him. One of them, an older reporter who had covered multiple administrations, spoke next. I've been in this business for a long time, he said. And I have to say, I didn't expect this today. Barron looked at him, tilting his head slightly. Why not? The man chuckled, shaking his head. Because most people crack under pressure. You didn't. A few more chuckles spread through the room. Barron smiled, but didn't gloat. Instead, he simply said, like I said, credibility is earned over time. And with that, the press conference had officially become a defining moment. Section 6, the bigger lesson, strength in composure. As the press conference neared its end, the energy in the room had completely transformed. What started as a potential ambush had turned into a moment of undeniable respect for Barron Trump. Reporters who had walked in expecting an easy headline were now scribbling notes with a different perspective. The news wouldn't be about him fumbling or making a mistake. Instead, it would be about how he handled criticism with composure, confidence, and intelligence. Even the most critical networks would have no choice but to acknowledge that he had faced a challenging situation and come out stronger. The final question of the press conference came from a young journalist in the back. Barron, what's the one thing you want people to take away from this press conference today? Barron paused, considering his words. Then, with the same steady confidence he had displayed throughout the entire event, he answered, I want people to remember that no matter what name you carry, where you come from, or what people assume about you, your actions define you. Words are easy. Reputations can be inherited. But respect? That has to be earned. The room fell silent once more. And then, applause. This time it wasn't hesitant. It was strong, steady, and genuine. Even some of the reporters who had doubted him the most were nodding in approval. As Barron stepped back from the podium, the moment was sealed. He hadn't just defended himself. He had set the tone for how he wanted to be seen moving forward. The cameras clicked, capturing a moment that would soon go viral, not as a scandal or a controversy, but as a lesson in leadership, grace, and quiet strength. This wasn't just a press conference, it was a reminder that true confidence isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing who you are. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to put you down? How did you handle it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful moments that remind us. It's not about where you come from. It's about how you choose to show up. Love.